to CP Newsroom. I'm Nicole Amenti. Joining us today is Kevin Palau, president of the Luis Palau Association, of course named after his father Luis Palau, who has preached to millions around the globe. Kevin, however, is the momentum behind another kind of outreach, one that seeks to pull together hundreds of local churches to serve their city. Welcome, Kevin. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Nicole. It's great to be here.
All right. So, of course, this initiative, if it's serving the city, it's perhaps called
New York CityServe.
There you
Sometimes
go.
the simple title that doesn't take a lot of explanation is the best.
Of course, but before we jump into what's going on in New York City, give us a little background about how this started in your home state, right?
Yeah, exactly. So if people know who Dad is, growing up it was always the Billy Graham of Latin America. So if people don't know, it's like if you think of Billy Graham, who better to be compared to? You know, always had this heart to bring the body of Christ together to proclaim the good news. So Dad's an evangelist, but he met my mom 50-some years ago in Portland, Oregon.
Okay.
And so we've lived in Portland, Oregon for almost 50 years. And Portland, being Portland, which the audience may not realize how politically progressive Portland is, how unchurched it is, in that sense there's a lot of similarities with the tri-state area.
Right.
You know, we know we're not in the Bible Belt. I'm sure the audience, if those that are from the New York City area, would realize that. So when something happened in Portland that drew the body of Christ together, both to proclaim the good news but to serve the city, it got people's attention. The quick story in Portland was we realized that as a group of churches, and particularly evangelical churches, we were known way more for what we're against than what we're for. No one intended that. We didn't get together and vote to do that.
Right.
But let's face it, over the decades that happened. So we did something very simple. We said, what if we went to the mayor and said, we think we could mobilize 15,000 of us Jesus followers from our churches to love and serve the city with no strings attached. What could we do? So after he kind of picked himself off the floor and said, these people that I thought were kind of just angry and marching around want to help, hunger, homelessness, health care, partnering with public schools, foster care. But the remarkable thing was the way the churches embraced it. They were ready for it. So in this first 6-month-long CityServe effort, not 15,000, but almost 30,000 believers were part of incredible efforts, making over the toughest urban high school in Portland, Roosevelt High School, and making such a difference, not just in the makeover, but becoming volunteers week after week, that the school superintendent, after about 2 years, said, you must find us a church partner for every school in Portland Public Schools. And now there's 253 such partnerships.
Wow.
So I could go on and on just about Portland, but that sense of the holistic gospel. We are an evangelistic organization. We don't hide from anybody. We think the best way we could serve someone is to introduce them to Christ. That changes a heart, a life, a family from the inside out. But we don't expect the city of Portland to necessarily embrace that. So we talk about CityServe, unconditionally loving and serving long term. And then in Portland we had City Fest, which was both the celebration of CityServe, but a very clear, unabashed worship. Kirk Franklin, Lecrae, Toby Mac, free thing. 50,000 people came. The mayor came and thanked the audience for serving, and he was the one that said, this is the best community service effort in Oregon's history. Let's do it every year.
Wow.
So now for 8 years there's been this consistent partnership of hundreds of churches and nonprofits with the city, with the school district. That story trickling back to New York was what led people like Tim Keller and John Tyson, some of the younger guys, A.R. Bernard, to say, could we do something like that here? 2 years later and hundreds of meetings, here we are.
So, and of course, like you said, it started in Portland, has been replicated in other cities, and now we're in New York City. And New York City, I guess, similar to Portland, is a very liberal city in some sense.
That's right.
So how do you convince not only, maybe the non-Christians, the people who are hungry to get involved in work? How do you convince them to put their suspicions aside? And how do you convince the churches, though, to put their suspicions aside?
You're exactly right, Nicola. Those are suspicion. It's just part of life today.
Right.
People have been burned in the past. They worry, especially in a big city, the outside organization coming in to, in a sense, almost, you're here to use us, take a bunch of pictures, and then go back and claim that you saved New York City. People are so tired of that. So I think we tried to genuinely come in, and it's been 2 years to get to this point where tomorrow 1,250 pastors and leaders from every borough, denomination, ethnicity are going to be together, which is historic in itself. Yeah. I think they've become convinced that this is really about celebrating and serving what the church is already doing, so that people will say, we know you're already serving. This isn't inventing community service, for goodness sakes. Little churches, big churches are serving, but so often the right hand doesn't know what the left hand's doing. The city doesn't see it, because evangelical churches don't have the big historic buildings that people can see for the most part. So we tend to be a little, like, they don't quite know where we are, who we are. This is it's almost a coming out party for the body of Christ around serving. So I think what it takes is for the mayor's office, Mayor de Blasio recorded a great video greeting for us tomorrow. So they've become convinced that we mean it when we say no strings attached. We're not asking for money from the city. We're not asking the city to partner with us on sharing the good news, but we are saying the church is already an incredible force for good. No other entity is embedded into every nook and cranny of the tri-state area like the church. McDonald's and Starbucks wish they had the market penetration of the church, every corner. So when you can help mainstream leaders that may not necessarily be people of faith see the potential of mobilizing that force for good, led by the key practitioners on homelessness, the Bowery Mission, Salvation Army, they're doing it in other areas. So it's not a bunch of naive do-gooders that are going to come in and make things worse. Right. So you have to carefully explain that. And then on the church side, it's more the, can I trust your heart? So you're here to serve us. It's not, we're here to serve you and make an event look good for Luis Palau. It's you're genuine here to make every church more successful. So I think we've turned the corner. I think that leaders like A.R. Bernard and Floyd Flake and Jim Cymbala and Tim Keller and others have become convinced this is maybe a kairos moment, an opportune time to unite the body, again, both to serve and to share the good news for such a time as this.
And you raised a few points there about the dynamics of New York City. You know, we have 5 boroughs. Right. Each of them, you know, have their own uniqueness.
Right.
And there's so many historical churches here in New York City, so many emerging church movements. That's right. And, you know, New York City is the melting pot. So speak a little bit on the bringing together the multi-ethnic and multi-generational aspects.
You're perfectly well said, Nicola, because if it's going to be the body of Christ, you can't ever get everybody doing anything. Correct. But if you can genuinely demonstrate the key Chinese churches from both the Queens, Flushing, kind of Chinatown, and the Chinatown, you know, Lower Manhattan, embracing this, which they are, and saying, what could we do in Chinatown to serve Chinatown? The key Korean churches, Promise Church in Flushing, Queens is one of our chair people. The Caribbean churches, the Jamaican and Haitian churches in Brooklyn have embraced this. Certainly the historic African American churches. Latino churches, we're trying to hold them back. They're just like, they don't understand why we have to wait so long. Because they know and love Dad. And they said to Dad at the very beginning, Luis, you know, Dr. Palau, you're the only person that can bring together Mexican, Dominican, Puerto Rican, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Non-Latinos can tend to assume, like we all do about each other, oh, well, you're all the same, you all know each other. Right. Tell that between a Dominican and Puerto Rican church, it's like, you know. Yeah. So we're seeing this incredible coming together, because I think when the vision is simply a kingdom vision, a gospel vision that lets everybody succeed, and it's not about, we just have a big event, and it's a showcase for Luis Palau to preach, and we're all supposed to go to make the picture look good. When it's like, no, this process is a long-term process. It's sustainable. In Portland, the festival was 8 years ago. It was a catalyst, but we're continuing to flourish in the relationship. So I think that's what's captivated people. What could it look like in Crown Heights to get 10 Crown Heights churches that don't know each other to begin thinking and dreaming together? That's happening all across the area. And I'd say the younger church planters that I can relate to, because Portland has a lot of those kind of, the guys that are tattooed and pierced, and you know, they fit in, the hipster kind of churches, you know, that fit in, thank the Lord, with Williamsburg folks. They love it because they want to see cultural engagement. They want to see an ability for people that have been burned by the church, or have all these negative stereotypes, to say, these churches seem to have relationship across cultural lines. That speaks to political correctness today. Who other than the church can do that, ideally? And then it also speaks to unconditional love always is a key to opening people's hearts. When they see that we're willing to go serve in schools when you can't preach in schools, that we're willing to go serve and makeover family homeless shelters when that may not be the place to share the good news. We have to, I think, earn the right to be heard, and we absolutely will share the good news. I don't want anyone to be confused about that, but I think the 1-2 punch of serving with no strings attached and then joyfully celebrating, not like, now we're going to, in an embarrassed way, say this is what, no, we're not ashamed in the slightest of it. So we have seen anyone that would come to this big launch tomorrow, we'll see every shade and flavor and age group, men and women. It's going to be exciting.
Wow. Well, thank you, Kevin Palau, for sharing about New York CityServe. Definitely looking forward to it. It sounds like something historic. And, you know, if it can be done in Portland, and then if it can be done in New York City, it can be done anywhere.
No question.
All right. Thanks again.
Thank you, Nicola.
And thank you for tuning in. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please write to us at cpnewsroom@christianpost.com. See you next time.